Hey guys, welcome to season 1, episode 10 of the... that's wrong. It's episode 11. Good start. Hey guys, and welcome to season 1, episode 11 of the Every Plant Story podcast, the podcast where we share all kinds of plant stories and the behind the scenes from us in the life here at Gabriella Plants and all around our lovely plant community. My name is Shane Malloy, and I'm the owner and president of Gabriella Plants, and I'm hosting this podcast along with my co-host today, Zach.
Hello, hello.
Who is our media director here at Gabriella Plants, and a little bit later we do have a special guest with us. You can go ahead and say hello, Brett, who is our head grower at Gabriella Plants as well.
Hi, guys.
Yeah, we'll get to Brett here in a second. We want to talk, the meat of today's podcast is going to be all about soils. It's one of the most frequently asked questions we get, Zach, quite a bit, and especially with customer care, gets that a bit. Everyone's got to repot their plant at some point, or at least it's inevitable. It may take a little while, maybe something you got to do right away, but you're going to have to do it at some point. So we'll talk about soils, but first we wanted to just kind of go over the recap of where we are. Guys, it's June.
How in the world?
No, like for real. It's June. I can't believe it. I was on my way in today and my phone was just like, it's 6/1. And I was like, oh my goodness, June? Brett, like this year has completely flown by.
Absolutely. It's crazy that I've been here 6 months, and at the same time, I feel like I've been here for years. So
Yeah, it's in the same way. It's 2 weeks long and it's 2 years long at the exact same time, 100%. And, Zach, you're kind of in the same boat.
Yeah.
As far as you've been with us for about 6 months as well.
Yeah, I'm still trying to get used to writing the correct year. And we're already halfway through it. And I'm still trying to learn it.
You got another 2 months until you finally get it right.
Exactly,
and then you got about 3 months of knowing how to do it right before it goes away again.
Exactly, yeah. I'm just on like an 8 month, kind of like
it takes
delay.
time to adjust.
Yeah.
It takes time to adjust. Well, time certainly doesn't stand still, and the plants aren't standing still either. That's the other big thing I've noticed. Just right off the top is everything everything growing is just exploding. We've been having some warmer temperatures here in Central Florida. We were in the high 90s last week, and it's amazing to see how much every plant just wants to kind of yawn and take a stretch. And
Absolutely.
I mean, they're just happy.
Yeah, we were talking about that yesterday, how you walk in there and it looks like a completely different place. I mean, there's just so many colors, and on my end, it's great because I can walk in there and just shoot any direction, and it's gorgeous.
Yeah,
But
that's a media creator's dream, is like to not have to frame it just right to only show the one corner that looks good. You have unlimited options, and the greenhouse team's been absolutely killing it at our growing location. In fact, last week, they did for the first time a full inventory count using our internal GP app, which is a tool we've been developing ourselves for quite some time. It's also kind of the backbone of the Every Plant Story nursery stake system. But we've been using it primarily to organize plants for the sake of release of inventory on our website, things like that, kind of keeping track of what we have ready to sell. And up until last week, that had been primarily how we used GP app for the most of what we did week to week, was just kind of keeping track of the plants once they reached maturity and ready to be sold. But the long-term plan and what has been in the works for a while is getting it to the point where we could track things from the moment they're planted all the way until they ship out, which we've been doing. That's where the story stake system's been coming from. Hopefully some of you guys listening have gotten some of those story stakes. We got a couple really cool feedback emails from the nursery stakes this past week, which was really cool to be able to share with the dev team. So keep those coming if you have any thoughts, feedback at everyplantstory.com. But that's been really neat. But Brett, you got to kind of see the whole greenhouse count, everything. And it was over 60,000 plants, and that was just what was essentially destined to be sold at some point. We didn't count some of the kind of odd ends.
Right. So first, I want to say it was inspiring to see the team work so efficiently and just amazingly together, in the fact that we were able to count literally every single plant that has been planted that is destined to be sold all in one day.
That's really impressive.
And we got it all done. We were systematic about it. And like you said, Shane, we didn't count any stock baskets or anything that we take cuttings from that isn't destined to be sold. Those weren't counted, but still, for there to be almost 60,000 plants out there awaiting to one day be sent to our customers is pretty cool.
Oh yeah, and it's just kind of random little story, but one of the funniest phone calls you get every year in agriculture, and I've gotten it now, 4 years I've been running the business. You get this really sweet, nice lady from the U.S. Department of Agriculture who calls, and depending on the crops, we're talking about the federal government, USDA. They only care about certain things. So if you're growing certain crops, they'll be more involved in your agricultural life. But with houseplants, they really only are looking for, roughly speaking, how many of what different sizes we produced, and just, a ballpark number of what we think we either have in our greenhouse or what we sell per year of number of items. Mm-hmm. And it's always a really kind of awkward phone call to take because I've never known how to know the answer to that. You know what I mean? You just kind of look around and you go, okay, well, if we can roughly fit 850 4-inch on a bench, and you kind of do some quick math in your head. And
right.
And the past 2 years, my secret trick is, well, what did I put last year? and then they'll say, well, you put 40,000. I put 50,000 this time because I don't have a way of actually proving that it's.
So this is the first time that the greenhouse has been fully counted
that I can ever remember.
Individually. Wow.
Yeah. That I can ever remember. I mean, we had counts, and when Dad used to grow the Boston ferns and stuff, obviously the stuff that comes in via tissue culture and stuff like that, you kind of have a count on ahead of time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, especially the stuff we were doing from cuttings, we never had a way of knowing that number. So it was really cool to see that number. And by the way, the USDA thing, they don't care that it's an approximate number. That's okay.
It's not like your taxes.
Yeah. You're not lying in a way that's going to perjure yourself or anything. Yeah. But they're just trying to know, roughly speaking, how much you're working on, and it's been really cool to see those numbers pop up. And I've also gotten a chance to use GP app quite a bit because with Brooks's the greenhouses in my backyard, I've already been really getting to work in those. I've already planted over 2,000 plants in there, even though I just have a couple, kind of temporary benches on some ground cover, still waiting on a couple of the parts for the professional metal benches that should be in the next week or so. And then we'll start slowly moving some of the things that I'm going to be working on propagating, like the Gabby and the Rios, over to Brooks, which is mostly what I've been working on over the nighttime, mainly because it's a lot cooler out there in the evening time. And during the day, obviously, I'm trying to help you guys as much as I can, the team. But going back to the team real quick, and then we can kind of close up on the count thing. And Sam wasn't able to join us on this podcast, so I'm kind of voicing his perspective a little bit in this. But the cool thing was, as Brett kind of mentioned, not only was the team, surrounding the whole count on Friday when they actually did the actual count, but from my vantage point, the whole team across all of our different specialties really came together to help understand what each other needed and make it happen. I know Greenhouse, you guys had a meeting with Dev earlier in the week, I believe on Tuesday,
right?
And kind of talked through if the goal is to count by the end of the week, what are some tools we can build in a quick amount of time to make that count a little bit easier than the GP app we had kind of been using, which had been primarily focused on being used at a desktop computer. It wasn't as mobile friendly as we'd like. And obviously, if you're going to go count through an acre worth of greenhouses, it's way more efficient to be able to go ahead and, do that on your phone or on a tablet than having to take paper notes and come back to a desktop. So it was really cool, not only to see that the greenhouse team got the count done, but that in order for you guys to have the free time on Friday, shipping needed to request plants the day ahead of time and make sure that inventory was on board with getting them. That happened perfectly. Dev got you the tools and the training stuff to be able to have those new tools to be able to make the count successful. And meanwhile, all this is going on. Shop is still open. Alexa's doing a great job. So it was just an amazingly proud moment for me to see not only, the task of counting getting done, but to see all the teams coming together, understanding what's on the plate of the other team and helping work as one big team, even though we're spread across into 4 locations now. That was just super, super cool to witness. So bravo to you guys and bravo to the rest of the team for making that happen. Because, it's not easy. not every business can walk into multi-location stuff and do it as well as I think we have at this point. So,
oh yeah, especially with how fast too we've kind of grown into it. Just kind of constantly just learning the changes and then adapting and being able to still kill it like that, and seeing all those teams just adapt and just kind of fill in those different positions. Was great.
And going back to the whole, it's June 1st. I mean,
Right.
Yeah, that's we haven't been multi-location until January, so we're also on the same time indicator of how long we've been doing the multi-location thing.
Yeah, and I mean, not enough credit, I feel like, has been given to development for the fact that they were able to create this GP app product that we were then able to go and use on Friday, and we had no snags. We were able to count the entire greenhouse, and it was completely fine. There were no issues. Everything worked like it was supposed to. I mean, it was just so seamless. It was really, really incredible.
Dev really is some unsung heroes as far as just building all these tools for us to use. Chuck and Robert have just been phenomenal, and the rest of the team on the development team have been great building these tools that we believe will make our jobs easier, make us more efficient, but also we believe will help more growers in the future also be able to do the simple task of growing a little bit better. So anyhow, that's a good place to wrap that up as far as the greenhouse recap. Plenty of story stakes going out. It was really cool to see the count, to see the team coming together. Last thing in kind of housekeeping is shop, as I just mentioned, has been open and is now running its normal weekly hours. So if you want more details about how to visit our shop in person, come say hi to Alexa. You can visit GabriellaPlantsShop.com, and the hours and everything should be there, or you can search in Google Gabriella Plants and it should come up with shop and the open hours there as well. So hope to see you there at shop. Moving on though, and those open hours are Wednesday through Saturday as of right now. They may change in the future, so just go to the website for the most up-to-date information. Now that we're kind of past that recap stage, let's get into the meat of today's podcast on soils. But before we get there, Brett, what else has been happening at the greenhouse that I haven't had a chance to see? I just want to be able to, highlight any of those moments. And
of course, well, great things are in the works. Like we say here at Gabriella Plants, we're always growing more. Lots of new things coming in. We're continuing to expand our collections that we offer. So our arid plants, we have our adeniums, aka desert roses, are growing and ready to ship out. We have 4 colors, pink, white, border, which is white with a pink margin, and picotee. Very, very cute plants. We're expanding our Haworthia collections. I believe we have over 6 varieties of Haworthias now.
wow.
Sansevieras keep going. All those things, anything you wanted for highlight, low light, anything in the mix. We are about to get our first batch of new Rex begonias. They are part of a new Jurassic series that was offered to us first as a forerunner because we, have connections in the industry and whatnot, and wanted to get our foot in the door. And so we have 22 new varieties of Jurassic series Rex begonias coming.
That's awesome.
So those will be awesome, and they're going to grow great in our new evaporative cooling Brooks greenhouse. And so big things ahead for those.
Speaking of cooling, holy moly, that thing can cool.
Oh, you can notice it?
Oh, yeah. Now, and the weird thing is, I think we talked about this last time, but just for brief recap, the weird thing is its cooling effect is massively dependent on what the outdoor humidity is. So if the outdoor humidity is fairly low, it can cool quite a bit. In fact, last week when you guys were doing the inventory count, it was around 98 at our original growing location, and it was 81 inside Brooks. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah, that also, it's not just about it being cooler though. Like you said, it allows us to grow some plants that, we couldn't have grown otherwise, like begonias, and they're going to love it.
Absolutely. So very exciting things ahead in that department.
That's awesome.
As far as growing research and development, I am still at the greenhouses at all hours of the night, playing with pollination and propagation and everything. So to touch on, we had some Philodendron Williamsii that I grew from seed. So those I'm continuing to split out into 3-inch pots. So those are coming up. They're finally...
Wow. How many seeds do you think that was?
Probably close to 200. Wow. And there's still about 100 in the original tub that I'm separating. It's a slow process.
You kind of just threw all the seeds in one tub, let them all kind of germinate, and then kind of go through and pick them apart.
Yeah, absolutely. Going forward, I am going to change that process a little bit just because the separation is a little traumatic on their baby roots. But live and learn.
Do they
what
get
all of this is.
like entangled at all? Or?
Yeah, they're very much tangled right now in their tub, so that's why it's such a slow process to have to meticulously go through and try to separate them as gently as possible. And then, they were germinated in pure sphagnum moss, so now then also you're kind of ripping some of those tiny roots, and now you're putting it into soil. So there is like a slight rebound effect
I was gonna
that
say
they're
it kind of
going
like
through.
takes a step back for a second.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're putting on real leaves. They're getting cute, so those are awesome.
That's awesome.
We did go ahead and just to recap, I don't know if I had mentioned this before, but we crossed a Anthurium crystallinum X magnificum with another Anthurium crystallinum X magnificum, and so those seeds are setting, and so those berries are forming. They're starting to slightly pop above the surface of the infructescence on the plant. So probably 2 or 3 more weeks, and we'll be able to harvest our first seeds from that.
Now, when you cross 2 of the exact same thing, is that just kind of admitting that you're going to get the same result? Like, because obviously sometimes people cross, and are trying to merge 2 different species.
If it had been a true species crossed with a true species, it's called selfing, and essentially you're going to get kids that look just like the parents. But because the parents were hybrids themselves, the kids could be, in 6th grade biology, I learned how to do a Punnett square, with your dominant and recessive traits. And so because you have crystallinum and magnificum on both sides, the children could be more crystallinum, could be more magnificum, could be a hybrid of the 2, different than the parents. So each of those seeds, as they grow out, could be very different from each other.
Now, would you still call that the same name? Because
yes.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, do you put squared at the end?
I was just about to say we would probably call it crystallinum magnificum squared. I like that.
I approve of that. Yeah,
that's good stuff. That's good stuff.
Some things, and now of course anything that I say, I want people to get excited about, but also creating new plants is a very long process from the time that we do the hybridization to collecting the seeds, to germinating the seeds, to growing the plants out, could be years. So these things are in the works, but it's not something that you're going to see available anytime soon.
If you can barely pull them apart, we probably can't ship it yet. That's probably not to that stage.
But I did go ahead, and it seems to be successful, that I had collected a few weeks ago pollen from a philodendron maximum. The leaves on the parent maximum that we have in the greenhouse are easily 4 to 5 feet long. And there was a philodendron Weeks Red hybrid that we had that was blooming that was female receptive. So I did put the maximum pollen on that inflorescence, and it seems to have taken. So from what I can tell, we will have berries developing of a Weeks Red crossed with a maximum, which would be pretty cool looking.
The listeners can't see the stars that just went through. You saw Brett kind of like look around. That's gonna look, and then he just kind of like looked up at the sky like he was waiting for his true love to appear.
Something else I'm waiting to see if it took, but I did cross a philodendron Moonlight with a philodendron Jose Bueno. I put the Jose Bueno pollen I had collected onto the Moonlight inflorescence, so we will see on that. I
wouldn't even think you could do that.
Yeah. Are these all things that you haven't seen done before, that you just want to attempt to see if it is
absolutely
possible? Nice.
Yeah. So these hybrids that I'm attempting, as far as I know, have never been done before. So, it's exciting. And also, what I find to be the best thing about hybridization is you don't know what that's going to create. And also, like I was just saying with the anthuriums with the Punnett square, like if you have a Moonlight as a parent and a Jose Bueno as a parent, there's so many different genetics that could come from both of them that even if we only get 20 seeds, each of those 20 seedlings could be vastly different from each other. And so you then are able to continually go deeper and deeper and deeper into that lineage until you get a plant that is truly noteworthy that we could potentially put into tissue culture to then get mass produced at, a larger level.
And speaking of like, there's a million different ways it can come out. There's also a million different traits. Correct me if I'm wrong. A million different traits of when you're crossing, you may not grab the color, the leaf color may not be the thing that that is shared, but the self-heading or the smaller or larger leaf size or the shape may be the thing that sticks, but not the color. So like it's not always about now we're going to have a yellow Jose Bueno that looks like it's unfurted.
No, absolutely. And because a lot of these, we're doing hybrids with hybrids. So Moonlight is a complex hybrid that has 4 or 5 different philodendrons in its lineage. So even though the Moonlight has green paddle life leaves and is self-heading, one of its parents who may be an erubescens that had a vining habit, that may be expressed in a seedling, in a different form, that now you're like, wait, where did that trait come from? Because it may have been recessed in the Moonlight, but then through genetics came out in the seedling.
Which kind of to go back to English is like, you didn't get the blonde hair from your mom, but then your kids,
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And you're like, yeah, no, that looks just like mom, or you can kind of see where it came from. Well, that's really neat. That's awesome. It's so cool to see you describe new things that are happening. Obviously, I mainly try to keep propagating the things we already have, and it's always cool to run into you at night. If you ever, you're not over there a whole lot. I know we did that one time lapse at night, but it's always.
Yeah. Well, I just left that going, and I could see his hands sticking in and out of it a little bit. So I'm like, oh yeah, he was there at probably 1 a.m.
Well, it's always weird because sometimes I don't do it as much now that we're back into the warm weather, but in the cooler weather, I drive over to the greenhouses essentially nightly when the heaters run every night just to make sure all of them are firing right and there hasn't been any problems, around the middle of the night. And, at a greenhouse in the middle of kind of agricultural land, your neighbor's a little bit further away. You're not expecting like to see people or to see any lights. And there was a couple times where I was like, parked on the side of the greenhouse looking at one of the greenhouses and then would just see this like kind of light beam just like slash across the side of the other greenhouse. And I'm like, what's that? And then eventually I'd find him with like a headlamp in there, and he had just been like finding his way with a headlamp on. So
that's amazing.
I would like to thank you, Zach, for bringing that up. We did a time lapse of, I have a night blooming cactus, Solenocerius grandiflorus, that I've had since 2015 that bloomed for us. And so I was expecting the bloom. And so we did a time lapse and it was really awesome because night blooming cactus are so cool because they bloom at night, but only for one night. And so to be able to see that happen, but at the same time that we were doing that time lapse, I also had a Cereus repandus, which is also known as Cereus peruvianus, which is a tall columnar cactus, blooming that same night. And so I did attempt a cross-pollination between the Solenocerius grandiflorus and the Cereus repandus. And as far as I can tell, that intergeneric hybrid is the first time that those genera have ever been crossed in science. So it is kind of exciting to see and cross my fingers and hope that we get some sort of hybrid from that.
Also, what's the chances of both of them opening at the same time?
Exactly.
That's some...
Well, yeah, I even was talking to Brett about that, like how... Because I asked him, I was like, how did you know that these two flowers are... He's like, oh yeah, this one's probably going to go tonight, and this flower is probably going to go tomorrow night. And just like that, they did. So I was like, it's crazy how you can just kind of tell when they're getting to that point, when they're ready to just kind of burst open. And then they're there for 12 hours. Yeah, and then
that's
gone.
Crazy. We should post the time lapse of this on the Every Plant Story IG.
I got to get the rest of the information to Zach, but we'll aim for that for this week because you guys will love that.
Yeah, it's super cool.
We'll make sure to put it on the Every Plant Story one too, even if we cross post it on the main Gabriella account, so you could find this hopefully sometime soon at Every Plant Story.
For sure.
So awesome. Well, let's dive into soils because it's one of the most common questions we get. Most of the time, the question gets phrased in the sense of like, I'm going to be repotting soon. What soil are you guys using? Because they want to make sure that they're kind of replicating that or it's been working well. And we also have, in this year, speaking of doing all kinds of new things like the count and pretty much the whole first half of the podcast, we hadn't really experimented with a ton of different soil mixes. Previous to this year, we essentially used one mix for everything and would occasionally put in a tiny bit more perlite, making it 2 rough mixes we used. And now there's quite a few different ones we're using for the, ever expanding number of different plants that we're growing, which all need different stuff. So tell me the process, Brett, of kind of what you came into on the soil front and what you've kind of been developing for use of our stuff.
Of course. So first I want to say that we use the term soil here pretty loosely, as in we actually don't grow any of our plants in soil. We grow our plants strictly in soilless planting media. Soil is the contents of the ground, basically sand, silt, or clay that is outside that you could, dig in your backyard or in front of a building or something, and that's going to be soil.
Well, I guess that's an easy podcast, Zach. Well, we don't use soil, so guess we'll see you next time.
No. But as far as soilless planting media, we do have a wide array of things that we're using. So, like you mentioned, when I first came in, we were using BM6, which is a mix of 80 to 90% peat, and so peat is actually ground down sphagnum moss. Fun fact. And so 80 to 90% peat, and then the rest is a fine perlite. So we grow most of our tropicals in that.
BM6 or custom blend, which we got relabeled as BM6, and then they took it back and relabeled it as custom blend. It's 8515.
Oh, okay.
Just
Wonderful.
That's the one soil mix that I happen to know a little bit more about, only because of my family greenhouse has been using it for like a decade.
So we grow most of our tropicals in that. And then we have made a special, we grow the succulents in essentially a 50-50. So it's going to be 50% of the BM6 and then 50% fine perlite that we add in as well. That gives for a larger porosity. So drainage is faster, as well as it doesn't hold water for as long to mitigate any rotting that may happen. I then wanted to experiment with doing a special aroid mix. So at first we were using ReptiBark as a soilless amendment. ReptiBark is a fir bark product. We found, and through research and development of testing it, that the fir bark breaks down somewhat fast, which is good because it will allow nutrients to get back into the soil that the plants like. But from a production standpoint, we were looking for something that, had a little bit more stability. So we switched over to Orchiata, which is a pine bark amendment. So it's actually Pinus radiata is the pine that is used. The pine bark holds up longer and also has more structure and shape to it. Orchiata comes in 4 different sizes, so we use the power size, which is 9 to 12 millimeters, so essentially each bark chip is 9 to 12 millimeters. And so our aroid mix is going to be BM6 with some Orchiata and then some additional fine perlite, and then we also use a large coarse perlite, size 3.
Yeah, that was hard to find.
Yes, it was. It seems like, well, from what I'm hearing, that there is going to be a perlite shortage soon. I guess the perlite mines are shutting down because there's like a change of ownership and some sort of legal thing is happening. So people don't want to source large perlite, and when perlite is scarce to find, I guess it's easier to find in smaller sizes. So
yeah,
we
and
were
I
able to
imagine
secure
also
some.
like the shipping logistics of getting that coarse perlite, just because like I can make you some fine perlite out of some coarse perlite by taking some coarse perlite and like crushing it in my hand. So I imagine also, I imagine also like it's that much harder to get some of those ingredients simply because you got to make sure in the entire logistics chain that you don't just end up shipping them the same, outcome by the time it gets to them.
Right. No, you're right. And so that's our aroid mix, a blend of those 4 ingredients. We are using the aroid mix for things like higher value alocasias, like some jewel alocasias, things, like the Maharanis. We tried it with some peperomias, but we are going to switch over to a peperomia mix that is mostly bark. It's a 3-to-1 mix of Orchiata and BM6. So it's mostly bark. Peperomias are epiphytic in nature, which we usually don't think about because we typically see them in soil. But for our greenhouse condition, we are finding that they grow best when they are in something that is very, very porous, yet can still hold some sort of nutrients. So that's the difference of bark and perlite, because perlite is great for porosity, but it has no EC, which is exchange capacity. So perlite is able to have air spaces that water can go in and out of and air can flow through, but it has no way of holding onto any actual nutrients. It doesn't have any
nutrients to it.
Exactly. Whereas the pine bark is able to provide aeration and also, allow for some additional water flow, but it not only can hold onto nutrients like any fertilizer we put in the soil, but also will leach out nutrients as it slowly degrades.
So there are nutrients in the bark that the plants can make use of outside of the fact that they're retaining the chemical fertilizers that we can use.
Absolutely. Outside of a greenhouse condition, if you were looking at plants that were being grown in real soil, most of the nutrients that the plants gain from soil is from detritus or humus, which is essentially broken down plant matter. So looking at that in the same way, pine bark serves that purpose in soil that we don't have any sort of organic matter that could break down. We're providing that so that they can get some sort of benefits from nutrients that wouldn't be provided in a peat substance usually.
So when you talk about aroid mixes, I know that's a popular one that I see plenty of posts online about. This is how I make mine. What goes into ours? I know you mentioned some of the ingredients, but what is the kind of mix on that? And why do you think that that's beneficial for our customers to use? And also, are these ingredients most people can find? That kind of thing.
Sure. Okay, so we mentioned the 4 ingredients. So I'd say these numbers are very rough. I make every batch by hand. So if we do half regular BM6, which is standard potting soil, we then have a quarter bark, a quarter fine perlite, maybe an eighth large perlite, and then a dash of an additional eighth of bark or fine perlite, depending on how I see the mixes going.
What would you say a dash? Is a dash just like a quick little...
Yeah, is a dash?
Yeah, maybe.
Is it like,
what are you...
Are you like salt baying it? And you're just
also, if you... I do see, Brett is a smart guy because he's using parts to describe it, because otherwise he'd be like, I use this 5-gallon bucket of this, and all of our customers would be like, I just need enough to repot a 6-inch pot.
Exactly. That's the thing, because we buy our soilless amendments in bulk, so I use bags, so my dash is half a bag, whereas your dash may be half a cup. So
or a handful, or
exactly. Yeah. But it's good for, like I said, the jewel alocasias. We also grow our anthuriums in it, plants that in nature are more epiphytic or hemiepiphytic aren't.
For those who don't know, I know we defined epiphytic before, but for those who don't know what epiphytic means.
An epiphyte is a plant, so epi means above, and phyte is love. So an epiphyte is a plant that would grow basically in the air. I'm air quoting, quote unquote, in the air, which means that they're not in soil. The roots are going to be on a tree branch or something up in the canopy where they still get water and nutrients through rainfall in the rainforest or something like that. but their roots aren't sitting in a saturated, contained space of something. Because of that, those types of plants, though they can be acclimated sometimes and grow somewhat in a soil, it's not how they grow best. And we're after trying to grow the plants to the best of their ability to create a product that is, perfect for the customer. And so they seem to really thrive in these aroid mixes because they are airier. They do get some of those nutrients, like I was saying, from the pine bark and whatnot, that they wouldn't be able to get from, we don't put leaf litter on our pots or anything to give any sort of, carbon breakdown detritus. So they get that provided through that mix. And then also, overall, yeah, I think it's just because it's airier. They really enjoy that, and we see that the plants are happier, and also we can produce them quicker because they're growing how they want to be growing.
Yeah, and it's always been a something I think is kind of fun to mention is they're kind of those more better draining, more airflow soil mixes can also kind of be a double-edged sword in the greenhouse, especially you're just now experiencing it. But yeah, when we have those 98-degree days, it can be tricky to keep those moist. But on the flip side, we also realize that, it's been a time or two that we've been told that our soil mixes are on the heavier side for some of the things that don't use the aroid mix and use kind of more of our traditional mixes. And a lot of that is because of the temperatures and because of how much moisture they're going to need in order to essentially make it a full day.
That's absolutely true. It's a double-edged sword, and I mean that is the caveat of using an aroid mix is that it drains quicker, it holds less moisture, which means you have to water it more often.
Right, but on the flip side too, an aroid mix, especially for those plants that you mentioned, provides even more benefit perhaps than we even see in the greenhouse when it's inside your home, because some of our heavier mixes will tend to take a week, 2 weeks. If the high temperature inside your home is going to be 74, 76, that is not the same as 98. We have a lot of evaporation, a lot of moisture being, eaten, for lack of a better phrase, by just the sheer heat of Florida, which may not be the case inside your home. So It's important to kind of keep in mind how long something should be staying moist, and in some ways kind of tailor, at least for our customers and at home, tailor your soil mixes. Not just, it's I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not a one size fits all. The exact proportions you gave may need to be modified if, your house, if you're going into winter and your house is going to be even cooler than what I just said, you may want to give it even, more airflow and less materials that will hold on to moisture. So, there is no perfect mix, and it's important to keep in mind what your home and your growing condition is as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are people that swear by Leca, which is a clay aggregate essentially that is completely soilless.
Tell me how that works, because that is one of those things that I just haven't really got into. That's not so much a soil in the way that I think of it, but it's popular.
Sure. So Leca stands for lightweight expandable clay aggregate. So it's clay that they have taken and pressure forced into ball-sized pellets that you can get in various sizes, that you would have to take a plant and remove all the soil from the roots and then transplant it into Leca, or if it was cutting, directly plant it into Leca. And then the Leca sits in water, either passive or direct. So either there's a wicking mechanism or it is just completely immersed in the water, and then it essentially becomes a soilless growing media. That all you would have to do is fill it with water from time to time. Many people have great results with it. I personally, in my home, have not had great results with it. Like you're saying, everyone, has their preferences.
Yeah, and what their growing conditions, I don't think Leca would work very long in a greenhouse. I'd be sure of that.
No.
But, it is an option for some of those people who are, maybe still struggling to get stuff to dry out. Tell me what I know this is kind of going into fertilizers, but you mentioned that bark can hold on to different nutrients. Are there different ways of administering fertilizer that would depend on the type of soil? Because one of the questions I've always had is if you were using something like LECA, I mean, we use water-soluble fertilizer sometimes when watering plants, and obviously if you get a bouquet of flowers at, the grocery store or whatever that comes with that little plant food pack, is it one of those types of situations where because of how LECA works, you would have to introduce nutrients through?
Yes, absolutely. So when we are dealing with our type of soilless growing, the media can hold those nutrients somewhat. So we use, time release fertilizer as well as water soluble fertilizer. When you're doing something with LECA or even just water propagation, because there is nothing to hold onto those extra nutrients, you want to dilute your fertilizer mixes substantially, because essentially there is nothing in between the roots and the water and the fertilizer that it would burn the plants to give them all the direct nutrients at once. There's nothing to hold on to the extra. There's nothing that they can kind of take little pieces from as they need. So because of that, you do have to be careful that if you are doing some sort of soilless growing like LECA, you have to dilute your fertilizer.
That's interesting. Yeah, and one of the things that never appealed to me about LECA was just that, I don't know, I can see it being both a complete thing that somebody would be into, but just personally, seeing, like a watch pot never boils. If you look at something, I feel like if I can see the roots, it's just my luck that they'll never form. I don't know. That's maybe just a weird little quirk, but I don't know. Something about just what happens beneath the soil line to me is always supposed to be kind of hidden behind the nursery pot.
You're not supposed to be looking at that.
Exactly.
It needs its privacy to
exactly.
do its thing.
It's under the soil line for a reason. But well, tell me what other kind of tips would you have for a customer who may be asking if they need to be repotting a particular plant?
So, okay, that's a great question. And the biggest thing that I'm seeing online and on the internet right now is I just bought this plant and I'm going to remove every single piece of soil from the roots, and I'm going to look at all the roots and I'm going to wash it out and I'm going to inspect everything and then pot it. Just like how if you bought a brand new plant, you're not going to cut every single leaf off of it to make sure that the stem is okay. You shouldn't, in the same aspect, mess with the roots. The roots are an extension of that plant, and you messing around with it is really on a microscopic and a very minuscule level breaking each and every one of those individual root hairs that is so incredibly important in the viability of that plant and the plant's ability to uptake nutrients.
And that plant has just it's kind of like a little bit of a WTF scenario because it literally just spent 3 months trying to figure out how to do that whole process of making the little hairs. And it's yes, we finally got this. And then, screeching halt.
I really think it depends on your growing conditions. If you see a plant has come in and it's in, let's say, a soil mix that is 100% peat, and you think that that's going to hold water too long for your north-facing windowsill, then maybe in that time it is right to unpot it and put it into your custom blend aeroid mix, because you know that that's what is going to be best for that plant. If you see that a plant has come in and it's in a potting mix that seems to be pretty good, makes sense, I'm also okay with you taking the plant, flipping it upside down, removing the pot, and inspecting the plant's roots that way. If it's not completely root bound, it can probably go another 6 months to a year in that pot, in that soil. The other big thing I hear is, but I have a really pretty pot I want to put this plant in. Drop the grower's pot into the pot. No one will know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're really worried about it, you can get some of the extra, I'm not good with the cosmetic and that kind of thing. I let other people do that. But like you can get a little bit of the moss.
Sure.
Even the fake stuff, I'm saying.
Right.
Like
Just
from
like
Joanne.
spice it up
That's
a
what I'm
little
saying.
bit,
It's
yeah.
like
Sure.
if you're that worried about somebody seeing the nursery pot inside of the pot, like you can always do the little like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Get the fake IV or whatever.
Yeah,
that
hide
kinda-
it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, unless the roots are poking out the bottom of the pot, unless the roots are completely root bound, unless the soil is a mix that isn't going to work for your soil conditions, don't repot it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, I really like that. I think the other nugget that would be helpful for customers is also keep in mind to not make that, even if you know that you tend to do better with your mix and in your environment, I guess one of the things that have a little bit of patience when you're unboxing something too, because that plant may appear to be slightly unhealthy, which you may leap to the conclusion is because the soil is moist, and you may try
Right.
to draw these conclusions when in reality, something like an alocasia, we could have it in no soil. It's going to show up mostly limp because of how much they rely on lighting to keep their upright nature. So it's not always what it seems either. Like as much as soil is a huge part of a plant's life, it's not the only thing. It's not the only reason your plant could be declining as well. So keeping in mind,
That's
if you moved your plant between two different rooms and it all of a sudden starts taking a dive, obviously everything's situational, but my gut would say it's probably something to do with lighting or if there's a ceiling fan in the other room or something. Not my immediate assumption is not it got root rot
right.
by moving it into a different room.
Absolutely.
The limpness may be because of a lighting thing or because of a temperature difference.
Well, and I think, like what you were starting with, as a general rule, if you get a new plant, wait 2 weeks. Give it a 2-week grace period. Let it acclimate.
Yeah, it's a lot of stress to the plant.
Absolutely. I mean, plants in the wild were not being put in boxes and shipped across the country. That's not how Mother Nature designed it.
No.
And so, yes, and then as well as with everything being situational, I think another big thing is that I'm seeing on the internet now is, like you're saying, my plant is sad. Oh, it's root rot. Root rot is such a broad general term. There are bacteria and fungus that can affect and attack roots. And there's a plethora of both different bacteria and different fungi that attack the roots. So to just say my plant has root rot really has no scientific backing to it. There's so many different things that it could be. And 9 out of 10 times, it's not root rot anyway.
Mm-hmm. I mean, how many? I'm blanking on that, but we shipped almost 100,000 plants last year. It's not a rampant problem of when you get a plant out of a box that it instantly has root rot. And a lot of times, and this isn't to say we never have root rot. We've experienced it before. It can happen on occasion, but you tend to run higher and higher risks of the soil-borne bacteria and fungus, as well as other pests, the lower you drop your quality of ingredients. There are some people who will, going back to your whole, we don't even use soil thing. On the flip side of that, if you dig, part of the reason we use what we use, and for that matter, all commercial growers for the most part use what we use or something to the effect, is because of the amount of disease and pests that can come from just digging up the spot in your backyard. You don't know what that contains. So because we used bagged soil that comes in bagged, it's never, in the open bed of a dump truck as some other growers will use topsoil in that kind of way. It's one of the reasons we don't have many weed seeds.
Right.
Customers can have plants for months and not see weeds for the most part.
The soil mixes we get in, each of those bags has been sterilized. It's been pH adjusted. Most of them have a wetting agent that has been added to them,
Correct.
which allows for moisture to affect and hit and saturate really dry soil quicker, and also holds on to water a little better. Each of these things has been put into place because we're buying our soilless potting medias from reputable sources that this is what they do. This is their product that they're selling us. They're not just digging soil out from the ground. So no, we don't have any issues with weeds. And also with root rot, to go back to the dark ages with the scientific discovery that spontaneous regeneration, like life doesn't come from nothing. Like in order for root rot to affect your plant, there has to be that bacteria or fungus in your soil. It doesn't just appear because the plant was wet. Exactly.
Yeah, no. That was my point with you do tend to see it more active in the places that use topsoil, that use portions of their mediums where it is dug from the ground. And there's some plants that, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know how, what we use, and this isn't to say we're hoity-toity, but it's probably one of the most expensive.
Oh, absolutely.
Mixes.
We use
it's probably one of the most expensive bag soil you can buy in the United States right now. So if you're growing a bunch of orange trees or a bunch of pine trees, and people listening right now can't see that I'm like bear hugging a giant tree, you know what I mean? But those pots that like you couldn't bear hug, you're probably not going to be able to afford to put our bagged soil in that just because of the sheer cost. So it's not that all, if you buy it from a grower, it's not going to have root rot. That's not what I'm saying, but it does matter what ingredients you use, and it matters to that effect at your house too. Don't make the mistake of running outside and grabbing a shovel. But
to save $10, you want to just put your plant in the soil that you have in your backyard.
But at the same time, if you were doing 9 different window deckings, maybe just grab a shovel and grab some of that stuff. So it's all situational for sure.
Absolutely. It depends on what you're growing. And also, I mean, I don't want to poo-poo the growers that do use soil from outside, because if you're a landscape grower and you're growing plants to be planted in the ground here in Florida, it makes sense for you to plant them in a pot in the soil that's going to be similar to what is going to be in the ground. It is situational. So, I mean, we grow our plants in what is best for indoor care and indoor growing conditions.
Well, this has been awesome. Last thing I wanted to touch on, and honestly, you just gave me the idea a couple minutes ago, is the whole concept of wetting agents, because I do think it's something that people aren't familiar with. And as Brett kind of said, this soil that we source, or soilless mediums, you probably won't get me to admit we don't use soil. It's still a little bit better, Zach, than saying we play in the dirt for a living. So
I will never use that term. My professor, I took a soil sciences class in college, and my professor would say, plants do not grow in dirt. Dirt is what's underneath your fingernails and what you kick off your boots at the end of the day. Soil grows life. Dirt is not that.
Yeah, I said dirt over at the greenhouse once, and then it was Courtney, like from across the greenhouse, like, it's not dirt,
it's soil.
I was like, sorry, I won't say that again.
Zach's subtly insulting the greenhouse team while he's there, and he doesn't even know it. That's awesome. But these kind of, like you were saying, I mean, science has really pushed a lot of these things further than we knew before, and part of that is all of the kind of, just like anything at the grocery store, some of those kind of you could pronounce a lot of words, Brett. You probably can't pronounce all of the things on the back of a food label sometimes with all the extra syllables and stuff they throw in there. But it's kind of the same thing with soil, and there are a couple chemical agents that are used. One deters fire ants. Is a particular chemical that's used in a lot of those soils. But the wetting agent is something that I kind of wanted to bring up because with the soil we use and any higher end, potting soil that has a wetting agent in it, there is a sweet spot of not letting it, if you let it dry out too far, it will be extremely difficult to get it to reabsorb and go back to 100%, of what it was capable of holding. And at the same time, if you keep it overly wet, the wetting agent almost works too well, and it can not dry out as well. So your watering, both in the timing, the frequency of when you're watering, and also the amount of water, those soils can take a little bit of work to get used to kind of watering, but it is possible to take some of the soil we have and dry it out. And if, kind of just to put a ballpark there, if you're saying that soil has a 0 to 100% moisture level, if you know that plant's going to need around 40, if you go about 2 weeks of very intentionally keeping that soil at about 40 and never letting it get too much or, you know what I mean? Like always just stopping back at that 40, it does kind of, I don't want to say it learns, it's not a living object, but it does kind of learn what the achievable moisture level is and will make that the easiest thing to come back to. When you rewater it, it will kind of get to the 40% again and then leach out the rest of it unless you continue to give it water. And the way that that primarily works is the length of time water is running over the pot. So if it's completely dry and you put it in your sink and you just give it, faucet on, 2 seconds, faucet off, even though you watered 100% of that plant, it's not going to have regained its moisture level to 100%.
Right.
It may, in that 2 seconds of time, only been able to get to 10% moisture.
Water retention is actually, it's funny you bring this up because I'm sitting here with my soil science textbook in my lab.
Brett came in prepared. I was like, what is that binder? And he's like, my soil textbook. And my exact answer before Zach walked in was, of course.
And there's actually a scientific formula that uses the Greek symbol psi that you can use to calculate water retention. And so I'm not going to go into that. But yes, it is very much a way that you can, quote unquote, calculate it by the amount of time that the water is going through the soil, crossed with how dry the soil already is, crossed with the pressure of the water, and then also if there are any things extra in the soil like a wetting agent that will allow for the water retention to grab onto the soil particles faster than others.
Yeah. So the cool thing to kind of know about the main soil we use, and it kind of makes its way into every mix we use, even if it's a much smaller fraction, is the amount of time that you're, watering, 10 seconds, 30 seconds matters greatly to how much that soil is going to hold.
And for the customers, there are types of wetting agents out there that you can find online that you can buy by the gallon that you could mix up and then essentially drench your plants with that wetting agent that will then inoculate the soil with that. So if you are someone who is prone to letting your soil dry out a little bit too hard, and then you're worried, Zach just raised his hand, and then you're worried about that, that pot having to get wet again, and you're watering it 3, 4, 5 times and it's still cracked around the edges, you can get wetting agents out there. It's not something that just the industry uses. If you are looking for wetting agents, I suggest you search the web, but they are out there.
And one last little tiny little tip that I think I made in like an Instagram comment or something a couple weeks ago, but if you do happen to get a plant that you believe is not drying out quite as quickly, the other thing to keep in mind is that specifically when we're shipping plants, right, those little micro vibrations that happen, every pothole that's on your street and every street in between you and the post office, the plant is going to feel that too. We do a great job to make sure they're, not going to take on leaf damage or anything, but those subtle vibrations do slowly compact soil. Just like if you took a tray with some dirt in it and shook it back and forth, eventually you will compact that down over time. So that is a factor at play sometimes where it may not have been that condensed or that tight of a soil mix when it left our greenhouses,
Absolutely.
But was a result of shipping. One of the best things you can do to help that without taking your plant out of the pot and fully repotting it is simply just squeezing on the edges of the pot to help open up some of the airflow along the sides of the pot and help drain out that mix. Sometimes it can just be from that compression, which again was a problem we had a lot more of before this year. But with these newer, soil mixes and things, and for pretty much across the board, we use more perlite and a better draining mix than we did in the past 2 years. So just something to keep in mind that there are little things like squeezing the pot to create some more airflow, or even
really just it breaks up that soil too. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Or even just, like you said, kind of flipping the plant over to look at the bottom. You can also kind of pull the plant out loosely like that and add some rocks or some larger perlite to the bottom of the pot. That will also help make sure that there's airflow coming into the bottom of that and helping to to dry out that soil. But those are just some small little things you can do to get a little bit better airflow, even in our kind of more thick mixes.
I'd say my one tidbit would be, and I use them at home, most places, either online or even Lowe's or Home Depot, you can get a heating mat, like for plant growing, not like for your legs if your muscles are sore. But they're heated mats that you can put the pot on, and then not only will the heat obviously dry out the pot quicker, but also the warmth will stimulate root production. So your plants will root in quicker, and you will see that the growth will increase, as well as you just have to make sure to keep it watered now because it's going to dry out quicker.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, hopefully you guys have enjoyed this kind of talk about soils. I know this podcast is a little bit longer than we have in the past, but that's awesome. But thank you guys for listening. Brett, we hope to have you back sometime soon. If you have any more questions, listeners, about anything soil related, maybe we can throw that in the end of the next podcast or something. If there's a follow-up question, you can throw it to us via email at feedback@everyplantstory.com or shoot us a DM on Instagram at everyplantstory. Brett, thank you so much for being here and for going over all of your textbook. Again, Zach, I mean,
yeah, legit
prepared.
Science binder.
Seriously prepared. I love it.
When do we get him the Gabriel lab coat?
I
feel like you need to be 1 a.m. white lab coat with the flashlight running
so
around
hot in the greenhouse, but yeah. It can't be just
winter
the lab
time.
coat, though. Yeah.
It's probably against dress code.
Yeah, maybe in the wintertime when we can. Although his the personal protective gear you wear when applying pesticides can kind of. I mean, it's not that
works.
far away.
Yeah, that definitely. Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here, Brett, and we hope to have you back. Zach, anything else in the media world?
No.
Perfect. That's awesome. And definitely, Zach, we'll get that clip of the time lapse.
Yeah,
Instagram
Well, the time lapse. Yeah, well, I'm gonna get a little bit more info from Brett, and that's a really just. I mean, I learned a lot from that too, and it is the most just alien looking but beautiful at the same time plant. So yeah, we'll keep an eye out for that.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Every Plant Story podcast. Rate and review us on your favorite podcast app, and we will see you guys next week.
See you.
Bye.